Well, the resolution of the National Economic Council to put the fuel subsidy removal on hold for now is already, as would be expected, generating responses, reactions from all quarters. More on that this morning. Let's have this conversation with Peter Esele, who is a former president of the TUC. He's former president of Pengasan, and he joins us from Benin City, along with Dr. Muda Yusuf, who is founder and chief executive officer, Center for Promotion of Private Enterprise, CPPE. He is past DG, Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you, and good morning.
Well, let me begin with you, Mr. Esele. Is this in any way disappointing for you? Is it a shock that you are receiving this news that fuel subsidy is being put on hold for now?
Good morning, and thank you for having me. I don't think so. It's not a shock to me at all. It's something that I expected. And I think you and I have had this conversation before in one of your shows on the weekend. And I said, for you to take away subsidy, there are certain things that I think the government should do. And I don't think they have done it. First, you have to have the political will, and then you also have the political capital. And I think this government would have done, if they want to remove subsidy, it would have been done in the first 1 year of this administration, where they have huge political capital to expend. And since they didn't do it, what we've had over the years is been kicking the can down the road. So for me, this is not a surprise at all.
Is it a costly move, or is just one of those things that we have to suck up?
Yes, I think what they should have done, I don't think NEC should have gone this far of having this discussion or this conversation. When they started in the last quarter of last year, talking about subsidy removal, because there are two things you need to identify here. There is the economics of the economy, and then there is the political economics of the economy. So it is for you to find the balance between the economics of the economy and the political economics of the economy, then you can now move ahead to take away the subsidy. But the government have been lacking in that direction. They've not been able to get the balance. It's going to be costly in the terms that international community investors will be looking at the government as, can we do anything with this government because of the policy inconsistency and the policy flip-flop? So that also now become a challenge. It is costly from the idea of perception of what government stands for, which means when the government talks, you expect the government should have done its homework before addressing the public. So when this happens, you now have trust deficit.
And I don't even think that trust deficit is anything that we are working as seriously or assiduously towards, it would seem. And Mr. Yusuf, Dr. Yusuf, beg your pardon, when we hear government, I mean, it sounds so utopian, so grandiose, but then here we are talking about the same issue again. Yesterday we were talking about the power sector, in the entire energy spectrum, and today we are talking about fuel subsidy removal. How did that conversation or the news, how did it come across to you, Dr. Yusuf?
Yeah, thank you very much, Tayo. First of all, let me say that my understanding of what the minister said was not that it has been suspended. That is not my understanding of what she said. Because the position before now is that a provision has been made for subsidy up until June. And what the minister said was that the subsidy will not be removed immediately. That it will not be removed before the transition. That can only happen after the transition. So effectively, nothing has changed.
I don't understand, Dr. Yusuf.
Because the essence of...
Just a second, Dr. Yusuf.
The essence of what she said was that
just to be clear,
the incoming administration...
It was, just to be clear...
that will take this decision.
My sincere apologies. Just to be clear, hitherto, even before this year, the information available in the public space from the same minister is that the subsidy removal process will begin in June. That conversation was made last year, and June is after this administration. So there is no way the government could have effected it at the time, or maybe help us understand.
Ayo, the provision that was made in the budget was to have a subsidy to cover up until June. And the amendment to the PIA, which the minister also reiterated in her statement yesterday, was that this will end in June. So it is after June that we can begin to talk about whether this subsidy will stay or will not stay. And she said it that this subsidy will not be removed before the transition. In other words, that is going to take place after the transition. So she has not said anything new.
But Mr.
She has not said that.
But Mr. Yusuf, Dr. Yusuf,
yes.
Pardon me if I may come in there. Let me quote what the Minister of Finance said, because it is hugely suggestive of what is to come. She said, so this will require looking at alternatives to the fuel subsidy that needs to be planned for and subsequently put in place, but also what needs to be done to support the people that will be most affected as a result of the removal. And those things, as rightly pointed out by Mr. Esele, have not been put in place. The refineries are still not working. That's just one. And, the excess crude account is down. So there are so many things that are not put in place. So are you saying that because we still have a legal document, i.e. the 2023 Appropriation Act, that the incoming administration will go ahead and remove the subsidy? Or what she has said is a huge hint of what is to come after May 29?
You see, the removal of subsidy will have to come with a whole lot of things. We have been talking about palliatives. We have been talking about measures to be taken, medium, short term, long term. A whole lot of issues will come together with it. And the point is that it is for the incoming administration to come up with its own strategy. Because this requires a very holistic strategy to move from the current position of a subsidy to a post-subsidy regime. We have had it with this administration, it didn't work. We had it with the administration before it didn't work. But the point I'm making is that the whole debate about this subsidy is something that will have to be determined by the next administration. What is before us now is that there is a provision for subsidy up until June. So whatever will happen to the subsidy will depend on what the new administration is putting on the table. The current administration cannot be deciding for the incoming administration.
But Dr. Yusuf,
as to how this subsidy will be managed.
But Dr. Yusuf, would you be surprised if the incoming administration announces upon swearing in that subsidy cannot be removed in the short term?
That is left to the incoming administration. Just as Peter said, a whole lot of things will have to go into this decision. There is the economics of it, there's the politics of it. But the reality is that this economy cannot continue to carry the weight of the subsidy going forward.
Yes, that is left for the incoming administration. But Dr. Yusuf, would you be surprised if the incoming administration announces upon swearing in that subsidy cannot be removed for now?
Well, I will not be surprised.
So has the Buhari administration giving the incoming administration a soft landing where subsidy is concerned?
Well, we cannot be talking about soft landing because the soft landing will depend on the total package that the administration puts forward, especially the incoming administration. We have been talking about the issue of palliatives. They have been talking about this $800 million. There are palliatives around issues of transportation, around issues of food inflation, around so many things. The use of gas, for instance, conversion of vehicles from PMS to gas, conversion of generators from diesel to gas. There are a whole lot of things that should come together, and this will form the total package that will come with the subsidy. But if you continue to insist that so many conditions have to be met before this subsidy is removed, then we may put the economy in a great danger. Because already we are in the threshold of insolvency. The economy is technically insolvent. We just read a report of the World Bank saying that over 90% of revenue is used to service debt.
But Dr. Yusuf, this drives deep at the heart of, distrust for the incoming administration as far as subsidy is concerned, because its disposition,
economy that way?
But its disposition, upon takeoff in 2014 was that subsidy is a scam, but we've had subsidy for the last 8 years. So, how comfortable are you with, its policy on subsidy based on this?
Oh no, you see, it is also a very wrong statement to make that subsidy is a scam. There is a scam component in subsidy, but the reality is that the landing cost today is far higher than the pump price. That is the reality. Let anybody test the model. Let anybody go and import fuel and see whether you can sell it at 185 or 200 and make any profit from it. But the long and short of this is that this is a problem that we have to deal with. This is something that is not sustainable, and we need to have a holistic strategy of dealing with it, which will involve engagement with all the stakeholders. But we should not be putting conditions that are not realistic. Otherwise, the entire economy will go down. That is the danger that we face. Look at what is happening to Ghana. We don't want to look at what is happening to our rating by credit agencies. Our rating now is very low.
We have just one other person joining us in our Abuja studio, Mr. Sele and Dr. Yusuf. We'll take this conversation, expand this conversation with our guest in Abuja. Nyota.
Thank you very much, Ayo. And we have here Showumi Olabode, a group of experts on gas, United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, a senior legislative aide on gas and power to the Senate President, and chairman, New Energies and Hydrogen Study Group of NGA. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Showumi.
Thank you. Good morning. Always a pleasure.
You are in the mix of gas and the petroleum industry and all of that. You've heard from our colleagues, from our guests in Lagos, Peter Sele, former president of the TUC, and Dr. Muda Yusuf, founder, CEO, Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, and all that they put forth. I mean, you've heard the economics of the economy. But I'd like to take it from that angle where the Minister of Finance mentioned that there are two laws that insist or point in the direction of subsidy removal completely. But if that has to happen, it has to be with the new administration. The new administration will have to decide. For one who has always spoken about the need for a cleanup of the petroleum sector in Nigeria, what do you think?
Thank you. I think first and fundamentally, we need to look at the basics, because really, even when you call somebody an expert, he's actually a master of the basics. And there are not too many great things that are going to solve it. We're just going to take it bit by bit, but do it well. The devil is always in the details. So there is an economic part to the subsidy, and there is a political part to it. And that applies to anything economic, because many people seem to forget that all politics end with economics. If there are no economics, there will be no politics. And all economic issues have politics associated with it. In fact, the great school in England, the London School of Economics, the full name is actually London School of Economics and Political Science. So there is always a political aspect to all economic issues. So when we talk about subsidy removal, the economics speaks for itself in terms of the fact that we have this huge budget that goes into it and all that. But there is also the political aspect, the political part, which is the fact that it has significant capacity to affect the lives of everyone and almost instantly. So at the end of the day, you can do the right thing, but it can trigger unrest, because basically the figures that are coming out because of the devaluation of the naira is going to lead to galloping inflation. And it starts the day it is removed. The man with the transportation is going to jack up his price. The woman on the street selling tomato is going to jack up her price. the landlord is going to respond. So there will be spiraling effect. So even if people know that this is the right thing, the issue will now be, do they have the capacity, you understand, to endure the right thing? And there are certain fundamentals that need to be in place, which is really where the issues are. The first thing is that the figures, the economics that speak to subsidy itself need to be made transparent to everyone and easily verifiable. The key word being transparency and verification. So, and the second thing is that they need to liberalize totally those who have capacity to import. So it's not going to be the old boys brigade. So anyone should really be able to import these things. And the figures, the statistics of those importing it needs to be made available real time and online. That way, civil society can question it and all that. The third aspect of it is that government, as part of their own, need to have a systemic and systematic advocacy and education program that will reach out to the bottom of the pyramid. Not to the middle class, obviously, and not to the elite. So we are talking about education in local languages at the local government area to let them know the impact and the import of subsidy and what needs to be done. So when you combine the fact that people know and see that the figures associated with subsidy are going to be administered and removed in a way that they know that nobody is benefiting from it, it is easier to endure. So it is the fact that there's a lot of all these, the opaque nature of subsidy removal that is at the basis and the root of the distrust. So there needs to be significant and total transparency in the process.
Now, some would argue that that transparency in the petroleum industry was supposed to have been helped with the passage of the petroleum industry law, but it looks like it's more opaque now than before even the PIA came into operation. So if you're now saying that the fundamentals that need to be in place, first you mentioned transparency. That has been an issue. Why has transparency been an issue in that sector? And then you are calling for it again before. In other words, the subsidy may not go anywhere eventually.
Okay, so when it comes to administration of governance, there are laws, there are policies, and then, of course, there should be consequence management. So basically, laws can only do so much in terms of providing a structure and a framework. But when it comes to brass tacks, yes, you need policies. So what the Petroleum Industry Act has done is create the framework for transparency. But you still need those policies and activities. For example, there is no law that says your activities must be online. But you can create a policy that says the activities as it relates to the subsidy must be online and real time. You know, that totally puts spanners in the works for anybody with an ulterior motive, because it is always difficult when things are in the open. So the issue, why that is important, is that at the roots strikes a dagger at all the issues of lack of trust in governance. And the government does need it. So the issue will now be a question for governance. What do they really want to achieve with subsidy? Because there are ways to get this subsidy implemented without the distrust of people. And trust me, if people are certain that what they are suffering for is not for the benefit of a few people who may be corrupt, their capacity to endure significantly increases.
And I think that takes me back to Mr. Esele. I'm very interested in what he said, talking about two things that were needed to be able to successfully remove subsidy. He talked about political will and political capital. He said if the administration was going to take away subsidy, that this particular administration, they should have done it in the first year of their first tenure. That's sometime in 2015, between 2015 and 2016. And so I'm wondering, right now, they've moved this the minister has said this is going to, we're going to still hold on to subsidy until after the transition, and maybe it is the new administration that will inherit that conundrum. I'm just wondering, do you think that the incoming administration, when we look at what happened during the elections, do you think that they'll have sufficient political capital to be able to expend on such an adventurous project such as the removal of fuel subsidy, considering just how the elections went?
Well, it has to do with how the incoming administration is able to communicate its policies. Because first thing, why I made that reference is that when you are elected, like the Buhari administration was elected with such a huge wave that it would have been very easy for him to go ahead and say he's taking off subsidy. He actually had 3 windows, and those 3 windows he blew it. And then as a result, that was why I keep saying in some of your programs that I never foresaw them taking away subsidy. Now, what do I expect of the incoming administration? The president-elect, he is the first president. When he's sworn in, he will become the first president to have campaigned directly that he was going to take off subsidy. So if you campaign that you are going to take off subsidy, then you now have to tell us the means by which you are going to do it. And then it now becomes an option for us to have a conversation around it. Is it doable? And if you are going to do it, how long is it going to take? I have always been an advocate of a phased subsidy removal. Now, if the incoming administration comes in and says, I'm going to take away subsidy, we are going to do it gradually, maybe 30% annually, and then you cascade it down, let everybody be aware, and then you also know what are the challenges that will come. That's one. Then the other aspect why I was so happy that the outgoing administration just need to go quietly without touching anything was that initially I was worried when they said they were taking $800 million. You don't take $800 million and you share it to 50 million household, and then you're on your way out. No, because there are going to be consequence management, just as your guest in Abuja had made reference, as alluded to. So what do you do about that? So what I expect incoming administration to do is first, look at the state of the economy. Yes, I agree with Dr. Yusuf that the economy is in a straitjacket. We've not started yet. Now you look at the state of the economy, then you also now come up based on what you campaigned on. That, okay, this is what I want to do. This is how I'm going to deal with the economy. And then you also have to look at FX, because all of this that we are talking about, it has to be an omnibus plan. When I use the word omnibus plan, is that CBN is not going to make, if you liberalize, CBN is not going to make FX available for the marketers to import. So how are the marketers going to source FX? You have to address that. And if CBN is not making it available, the parallel market goes for 735. So even at CBN rates right now, I will tell you that the price of PMS should be between 320 and 400 naira. So if you go ahead and you now decide that you are liberalizing without laying the foundation, and then the marketers now have to go to the black market to source for FX, then you can buy a liter of petrol as high as 700 naira. That's what I'm talking about, omnibus plan. And then you also look at the workers, both formal and informal sector. How are they going to cope under the galloping inflation? What are the low-hanging fruits that you have to pick to mitigate whatever is coming? So I keep emphasizing. Now, look at what this administration have just done. The current one, you've increased salaries. They are negotiating. You have increased salaries. What are you getting for salary increase?
Well, Mr. Saleh, I think it's also very important to clarify, because civil servants are saying that salary increment should be ignored. I don't think that they are either satisfied or maybe they're yet to see it in their payment slips. I don't know what the situation is, but that's the news that we're getting today, that increment should be ignored. But I'm wondering, because it would seem that everybody is talking about importation as the alternative, and it does appear you have been in labor union, you headed the TUC for a long while, and amongst the labor unions, it would seem that there is no, I don't want to say synchronization, that's not the word to use, because all the labor unions are independent of each other, even though they sometimes come together. But it doesn't appear that they're singing from the same hymn sheet. TUC, which is also headed by somebody who is from Pengassan, seems to be saying, yes, remove subsidy, we will go with that plan. But NLC is saying very clearly that we hope importation is not what you're hoping to do. If you take it away, it is very dicey here. So I'm wondering, how do you think that would work? That if the federal government is to remove subsidy and still rely on importation, NLC is saying, no, that cannot be the plan.
The beauty of the labor movement is that we never agree. We never agree from the onset. Is that everybody has his own views. If you take, for example, if you ask Pengasson will prefer subsidy removal from yesterday. And then you also have Nupen. They also feel the same way. But when we are all together, when you have NSC, you have TUC, you have Nupen, and everybody now comes together, is that you now have to look at what is mutually beneficial. I don't belong to the school of saying win-win. No. The school of mutual benefit, mutual interest, it makes it easier for everybody to defend what is agreed on. So NSC will say, they don't want it to be based on importation, but whether you like it or not, we are still going to be importing. And I don't see that importation coming to an end this year. My initial confidence was that if the Dangote refinery come up this year, maybe last quarter of this year, then it's possible that importation will stop. But I don't see Dangote refinery coming up towards maybe 2024 or early 2025. It's still going to be a long shot for the Dangote refinery to come up. So the NSC, TUC, Nupen, Pengasson, just don't worry yourself about that. That is the beauty of the labor movement. They would have to come to a meeting. They also have to come to an agreement. But what the government must do, based on the information you've just given now, is that you are talking about salary increase. Even the workers have not yet agreed with you. So my stake on this is that the incoming administration must have a omnibus plan, but it must try not just to communicate. The incoming administration must communicate effectively. If it doesn't communicate effectively, then we may just have a crisis on our hands.
Well, let me come to Mr. Modu Yusuf. I am just wondering how the private sector is looking at this particular matter, looking at the fact that importation will most likely still be an alternative. I'm wondering first, how do you think that removal is going to hit you? Well, maybe hit all of us because we are all there. But, what's the concern for manufacturers in that space? Are they also, or are they looking to participate in that sector when it is effectively liberalized?
Yes, those in the private sector, particularly the manufacturers, are already taking a very big hit. Because, when you look at the energy consumption from the manufacturing sector, the bulk of it is coming from diesel or gas. And diesel has been long deregulated. So already, a good part of the private sector is already feeling the heat of a deregulated component of the energy sector, which is diesel. If you also look at the aviation sector, they are taking a very big hit with the aviation fuel, which has already been deregulated. So to some extent, there is already an exposure to the deregulation regime. When you look at diesel, you look at kerosene, you look at aviation fuel, and to some extent, even gas. So that exposure is there. But the reality is that for us to transit from where we are to where we want to be, which is to ensure adequate local refining, this deregulation or removal of subsidy is a major first step. Because you cannot attract private investors into this very important space if you continue with this subsidy. And if there is anything we need very urgently and very badly, it is investment in that sector. Because it is unpardonable that we are in a sector, we have been in this sector for close to 60 years, and yet we don't have robust private sector investment. And this is a sector that has huge opportunities, both to meet domestic demand and for export. But the sector has been practically crippled or paralyzed by this policy. So we need to exit from this, and we cannot afford to continue to leave this sector in the hands of the public sector. This is not to diminish the capacity of the public sector, but the reality is that the bureaucracy and the political environment is such that you cannot afford to leave this sector in their hands. This is what has brought us to where we are. We have 4 refineries for almost a decade. The refineries have not functioned. And we have spent so much money.
Dr.
We
Yusuf,
cannot continue that way.
Dr. Yusuf, real quick, because we're really running out of time. I would want to bring in Mr. Shomi here, but to you first, what advice would you give the incoming administration in terms of quick wins, things that can be done immediately? You've talked about the fact that removing of the subsidy is a major first step that needs to be taken in order to build the kind of local industry, refining and dispensing that you talked about.
Well, just as Peter said and the other guests, it has to be a holistic approach. There has to be engagement. And because of the level of oil price now in the global market, it is not practical to remove everything at a go. The shock on the citizens will be unbearable. So there has to be engagement on the phased removal of it. There has to be engagement on what kind of palliatives. And when I'm talking about palliatives, I'm not just talking about handouts. How can we use tariff policy, for instance, to bring down a whole lot of costs? How can we use tariff policy and other policies to encourage the migration of the use of energy from PMS to gas, from diesel to gas? How can we use tariff policy to bring down food inflation? So it has to be a combination of a whole lot of things to make sure that we bring down the level of cost of living, to ensure better transition, and to ensure that the shock on the citizens are not too much for them to bear. So that would be my suggestion.
Okay, Mr. Shomi, tariff policy, engagement with the Nigerian people at all levels to see how to bring down the cost of living, to bring down the galloping inflation that was likely to happen when subsidy is eventually removed. Low-hanging fruit that can be picked up immediately and move this country forward.
Well, it's nice to talk about things on the other side in terms of what they should do. But to my mind, I think the first thing the government needs to do is to understand the subsidy itself. So people need to make presentations to them so that they can understand and internalize the figures.
1 second, please. Are you implying that after all these years, government doesn't understand the subsidy? Remember, this conversation around subsidy is not something that started today. There were even protests when Goodluck Jonathan was there, President Goodluck Jonathan.
So let me say something. We were told that subsidy were removed twice during the last administration. Dr. Kachiku came on TV and went to say that there was under-recovery. That was when that lexicon, that word was introduced into our dictionary. So basically, there were statistics on which subsidy was removed and which it was no longer subsidized that was not made public. So you remember the first thing I said was that there needs to be transparency and the ability to verify figures. So those figures that are not in the open, the government needs to understand it. If I'm going to make a decision, I need to understand the full implication of what I'm deciding. Subsidy is not difficult to calculate. It is basically the landing cost, and how do you calculate that? There's a cost of crude oil, it's an international price. The cost of transportation to the refinery is international price. The cost of refining, you can even Google that, it's international price, and the cost back. So you know what your landing cost is per time.
The problem is the quantity. It's the volume.
With the volume, you get
we've been unable
discounts.
to agree on how much Nigeria is truly consuming. Now we're getting figures as high as 80 million liters, which has been contested by even the customs service. So
that is a different issue entirely. You get. So that comes to the issue of
transparency.
No, law enforcement and all that. Because as a technical person, or as the industry itself. You are not responsible for law enforcement. You understand? But what we are speaking to is the economics of it. And it is the economics of it, it is on this the basis for which the subsidy is calculated. So the government, the new government, needs to understand this figure, including the figures that are not in the open. And then those figures, after they've internalized it, need to be made public in a way that people can verify it.
All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Shomi Olabode, member Group of Experts on Gas, United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, and Chairman, New Energies and Hydrogen Study Group of the NGA. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you very much.
Aya, over to you.
One of the questions that I'd love to ask Mr. Olabode before we had to let him go is it important for us to have a plan? The subsidy regime started in the 70s. Maybe because we don't have a transition plan for it. So, Dr. Yusuf, do you think that is something that should be considered? To have an exit plan for subsidy towards which we can work and then ensure that we keep a timeline on as we wrap up? Dr. Yusuf, that's for you. Okay, well, I don't know if Mr. Esele can take that up. Well, Dr. Yusuf, we can see you now. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Well,
I said that, yes, we should have an exit plan. I mean, that's a no-brainer. I mean, there should be an exit plan. That is what we are talking about.
So you don't think there is an exit plan right now?
No. There is no concrete plan on ground.
Okay.
No concrete plan. The whole thing has been left to the incoming administration to be able to do. Okay. And the exit plan has to incorporate all the issues that have been raised, including ensuring there is competition. Because right now we have a monopoly situation. Okay. Which is compounding the problem that we have on ground.
Okay. Well, Mr. Esele, what's your take? Do you think we should have an exit plan for this subsidy removal that we've been talking about for ages? Started in the 70s, but if there is going to be an exit plan, according to you, what should it be? What should the content be, and how long do you think it should take?
I think there should be an exit plan. And I think the incoming administration should be the last administration where we go about discussing subsidy. It has to set that boundaries that the administration will close that subsidy once and for all. Then it has to give us the plan of how it intends to do it. But we should have an exit. Enough. It's embarrassing that we've had democracy since 1999. We've been discussing subsidy. I think it's an embarrassment. We need to put a closure to it. Thank you.
It's a good place to bring the conversation to a close. Peter Esele, former president of Trade Union Congress and former president, Petroleum and Natural Gas Senior Staff Association, Pengasan. Thank you so much for your time, as well as Dr. Muda Yusuf, founder and CEO, Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise, CPPE. He's also past DG of the Lagos Chamber of Commerce and Industry, LCCI. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time this morning.